Welcome back to the show. I have Margaret Floyd Barry here with me today, and I cannot wait about this discussion that we're going to have. We're going to talk all about autoimmunity. We're going to talk about our gut health, which I think is a huge thing. I see it with my patients all the time when we talk about gut health. They're like, no, my gut's fine.
Yeah.
But in the meanwhile, they're dealing with all sorts of stuff and they've got a belly up to here. Right. So,
Right.
so let's hear, tell them a little bit about yourself and then we'll start deep diving into all of these topics. How about that?
You bet. Absolutely. So I'm a functional nutritionist. And what that means is, we think nutritionists, we think, oh, we're going to like make a meal plan and like give you some recipes. And this work is a little more in depth than that. What we're doing is we're doing a deep dive into lab testing, just the way I'm sure you do, the way a lot of functional docs do. And what we're doing is we're looking for clues to understand what kind of imbalances are driving symptom presentation, right? And so we're not trying to diagnose anything. We're not trying to treat anything. What we're trying to do is figure out what is blocking the body's ability to heal and how can we, in a very strategic and informed way, use the tools of dietary change and supplement protocols and lifestyle interventions to basically remove blocking factors and give the body the inputs it needs to come back into balance. So that's what a functional nutritionist is, as opposed to just here's a meal plan.
You think of like the dietitian at the hospital, right? Like I've had a couple patients that ended up there and they're like, do you know what they fed me? And I was like, well, yeah, that's why our people are sick.
I know. So I'm always saying, yeah, no, I'm not the one recommending waffles for diabetics.
No kidding, right? And sugar-free Jell-O. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about digestion, our digestive health. We can even deep dive into leaky gut and gut health and all of that, because I know like it is a buzzword, right? Everybody, oh, it's leaky gut, or I healed my leaky gut. So a lot of times they probably did not heal their leaky gut by drinking a lot of bone broth, right? Like,
no, I mean, it's a good little baby step in the direction, but I don't think we've got all the way.
Right. Exactly.
If it were only that easy.
Thank you for saying that, right? Because we could have figured this out a whole long time ago.
Oh,
if it was that easy, we'd be bajillionaires.
Right. Yeah. No. Well, I think, our digestive system is so fundamental to our health overall. We're going to be talking about autoimmunity, and it is absolutely essential with autoimmunity. But even without autoimmunity, it is the thing, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, we are basically walking food. Right? Like they say that, oh, you are what you eat, but it's like, no, you actually really are what you eat. Like there is no cell in your body. There's no tissue. There's no organ. Like I always get clients like, look at your hand, look at the skin, the joints, the tendons, the bones, the muscles. Every bit of that was once food. But here's the clincher. The quality of those nutrients that literally build and fuel us and run every single system in our body depends on our digestive process and its ability to essentially harvest those nutrients from the food that we eat and then shuttle them around our body to do what the body needs to do, right? So that digestive process is so absolutely fundamental to everything. Like it is the starting point, because you could be eating the most pristine, nutrient dense, properly prepared, locally grown, like all the things. You could be eating the most, all the things. You could be eating the perfect meal. If your body is not able to properly break down that food into its nutrient components and then absorb it and use those nutrients, it doesn't matter. It's just money you're quite literally flushing down the toilet.
I agree.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I always say within our little chiropractic practice here, I'm like, it's not what you eat, it's what you assimilate.
Exactly. Exactly. It's just so essential. And, I think the digestive process, I think it's just magnificent and fascinating. Really, first of all, it's basically still the outside of our body, right? Like we're basically one very complicated donut, and the donut hole is our mouth, right? Yeah. Big long tube from the mouth, ends at the anus, and all sorts of things happen along the way. We hope everything's moving in the right direction. There's all these little valves kind of making sure everything's going in the right direction. And you mentioned leaky gut. This is actually a really profound moment if you take a minute to think about it. So, first of all, so we say leaky gut. The part of it we're really talking about primarily is the small intestine, right? And that is where the vast majority of the nutrients are absorbed. Not all of them, but the majority of them, right? And this lining of this intestine is 1 cell thick. So it's so delicate, right? And when we talk about leaky gut, really what we're meaning here, and is it okay if I just kind of give a basic explanation? Okay,
absolutely.
So we've got, we talk about the tight junctions. And so you think about these little cells lined up kind of like this, like grid, right? Just like little soldiers side by side. And what happens is that very selectively, those tight junctions will basically open up to let a nutrient through and then close back up. I mean, just think of like the most tightly regulated security system, right? Because they know that this is the last barrier between you and the outside world. And that goes straight into the bloodstream, right? So this is literally the final frontier between you and the outside world. This is where the outside world becomes you. And so that's a very, very tightly regulated system. And it's just like one little gate will open at a time and then another one. And there's other mechanisms, some go through the cells. We don't need to go into all those details, but essentially what happens with leaky gut is this, right? Like you have those tight junctions now open up, they loosen up, they get damaged. And now this process that's supposed to be highly, highly selective is allowing, it's like a freeway, right? It's just allowing all the things. And there's a lot of stuff in our intestines that we don't want going into the bloodstream, right? There's toxins, there's, the things that are bound for the toilet bowl, right? There's pathogens, there's bacteria, there are, even something like that perfect piece of broccoli you had at lunch. If it is not broken down sufficiently, that enters into the bloodstream and your body doesn't know what to do with it. It looks at it as a foreign invader because it doesn't recognize it. That engages the immune system, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And now you're just creating problems. You're creating inflammation. I mean, it's just, this is the gateway where a lot of things we talk about endotoxicity. So that's toxicity from within. And this is one of the key mechanisms for that is that compromised gut barrier. And so many things can cause it that are very, very common in the diet. And many people, I'm not going to say most, I kind of think most, but I'm going to say many to be conservative, have this without even knowing it.
I agree, 100% agree. And it's so much, let's talk about some of the reasons why they end up with it. I mean, it's so much in our lifestyle. And it's not just something we've just started recently that we end up with leaky gut, but it's, what I mean? It's like, hey, it goes back to our childhood and we're just never, I don't know, this is just our convenience lifestyle. I feel like so much, right? Like we have really, I'm a kid of the 80s. I just think of, how our food has evolved since then. Like we've created a monster.
We really have. We really have. And I mean, just sort of, we could spend an entire hour just talking about this one piece, but some of the heavy hitters, in terms of foods, well, all the processed foods, right? Yes. Like that is just so irritating. I just think of it kind of like a cheese grater, right? Like it's just really irritating to the system, and anything that's irritating, it's that one delicate little cell thick lining, right? Like it's going to cause an effect. Gluten, there's a massive one, right? So I'm very strict about gluten in my practice and in my life. And, I often get the like, but I'm not celiac, or, I've done this test or that test and it's come back negative. And it's like, okay, so I'm glad that mechanism isn't a problem for you. But here's the thing with gluten is that when your body breaks down gluten, it releases a substance called zonulin, which does this, right? It literally sends the signal to open up those tight junctions. And so it causes leaky gut in anyone when we eat it.
Regardless. Yes.
Regardless,
Yeah.
And then there's always the question, well, then why did our ancestors eat it? And it's like, well, then let's talk about the perfect storm of everything else going on, all these other things, yes, there's always going to be sort of environmental assaults, and I include dietary factors in that. But when you've only got a very small handful of those stressors, our bodies are magnificent, right? They're so resilient. And so they can handle a lot, but we're in a whole new world when it comes to, so other things. Just taking things like, your NSAIDs, like your ibuprofen. That was a big one for me back in the day before I moved into this field. I used to suffer from really severe migraines, and I could not be like I have tracked, I had like at least half a dozen bottles of Advil, and I knew exactly where everyone was. I had it in my purse, in my car, at my desk, at my work. I had it in my bathroom. I was dating a guy 2 floors down from me. It wasn't close enough to have it in my bathroom. I had to have it in his bathroom as well. Like I just lived on this stuff, right? And so, you know, and that's just one example. I mean, there's just so many stressors that are causing damage to that gut lining, and it's the starting point for just so many issues.
And you think of how many antibiotics we were all thrown on,
Oh,
you know, like, oh my gosh, I
totally.
remember thinking, like, because I had, you know, teenage acne, they threw me on antibiotics.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, gosh, if I only knew. I mean, I was in a holistic world, but I also had the medical model growing up, and man, I just wish it was all holistic at that point. But the other thing, you know, and I don't think people even realize this, but let's talk about how with gluten, they spray it with glyphosate right before harvest. And so when we talk about our ancestors, you know what, guess what? Monsanto wasn't around then. And if you don't realize, like, it's those things that people don't understand on why we want to do organic, but it's also like, there is no reason your body needs Roundup in it. I probably should not be saying 100%. Names because it'll just get us pulled. But I'm at the point now where I'm like, we're speaking the truth. Over this last year, we're speaking the truth. So
it's a huge deal. I mean, just the wheat. So, you know, glyphosate, that's a massive issue. Glyphosate aside, even just the gluten proteins that are in today's wheat, it's a totally different wheat than the bread that even like, now I'm a 70s kid, the bread that I was eating when I was growing up is totally like, it's not even recognizable. And there was, I think it was like 40 years ago, I'm going to space in the name of the scientist because I'm terrible with names, but there was a whole process that he went through, won the Nobel Prize for it, for hybridizing wheat to get this like doughy, squishy crop. You know, like I'm not an agriculture person, but like really like these hardy crops. And the amount of hybridization, it wasn't genetically modified. Some people will say, oh, no, it wasn't genetically modified, but it was just such excessive hybridization that entirely new forms of the gluten protein were created that literally didn't exist previously. And, you know, again, our bodies are magnificent things. They don't adapt that quickly. Right. These are just, the body just looks at it as foreign. Don't know what to do with that. Anything that's foreign, you got to get it out.
No, I agree 100%. So let's talk about autoimmunity, because this is something too, I don't even know how to say this and how to say it so that we're not going to get pulled, but there's been something introduced in the last year and a half that's increasing a lot of autoimmune issues. I'm just flat out going to say that we're seeing it. Those of us that called it a year and a half ago, we were told we were nuts, that this wouldn't happen, but we're seeing it. But let's talk about what exactly is autoimmune. So I want you to start just
completely.
Yeah. If somebody's dealing with autoimmune, like if you're listening right now and you're like, you know, something's really changed and I don't know what it is in the last year, because I've had multiple people walking in, like, I can't figure it out. But there's one big player. But anyways.
Okay. Well,
that's a whole nother rabbit hole we don't need to go down, but I do want to put that out there for people to dig and do some research. But in the meanwhile, what is autoimmune? And we'll deep dive into that, because there's
it's a big one. So, I mean, so let's just talk about the immune system, what it's supposed to do, right? Like and this is dramatic oversimplification, but at its absolute root, the immune system is there for 2 jobs, right? Housekeeping and protecting us from dangerous pathogens. That's its job, right? And as a really critical aspect of this is this ability to differentiate both between self and other, and then when it comes to other, between friend and foe. And what we have with autoimmunity is that mechanism of differentiation has gone awry. So now, rather than protecting self, the immune system is actually attacking self. It's perceiving self as enemy other. And the definition of the disease is based on the target tissue. So, you know, Hashimotos, it is the thyroid, right? You know, psoriasis, it's the skin, you know, et cetera. So the different types, I mean, there's 150 plus different autoimmune diseases. And I feel like the list is growing every single day as they recognize autoimmune components to things that we, you know, I had eczema as a kid. We didn't think that was autoimmune. Now it's like, oh, that's actually an autoimmune process. So the process is the same. It's this errant immune system that has gone awry. And the really important question is why? right? Like, why is this immune system basically making bad decisions? And again, this is an oversimplification, but at root, what is happening here is just like, if we're constantly engaged, right? Like we're just, so much is being asked for us in all these different directions. We're not getting enough rest. This goes on and on and on. Over time, we start to make bad decisions, right? It's the exact same thing with the immune system. If that immune system is constantly being engaged, whether it be from improperly digested broccoli because of a leaky gut, whether it be because you're eating lots of gluten, whether it be because of environmental things, injections of things that the body doesn't recognize and doesn't like. There's a lot of different things constantly are taxing our immune system. And so the difference between like the conventional medical model and a more functional model, the conventional medical model is like, this person's hurting, so we're going to look at the target organ. Like, I'm just going to use a Hashimoto's as an example, because I do a ton of work in Hashimoto's. So Hashimoto's with thyroid, they look at, okay, the target is the thyroid. What's happening is the thyroid is not producing hormones sufficiently. So we're going to replace those hormones, and maybe we're going to bring in some anti-inflammatories. In some cases, I'll bring in like, immune suppressant, because it's like, ooh, the immune system is going crazy, so we need to shut it down. Now, the immune system is also incredibly complex, and you do any of this kind of manipulation, and
yes,
there's
some
pretty dramatic side effects to that.
Mm-hmm.
I will also acknowledge there's a time and a place. Sometimes in some really severe forms, I've had a client with very severe form of myasthenia gravis, for example, that was absolutely life-threatening, and 100% she needed to be on those immunomodulatory drugs. And she's still, at the same time, we need to be doing the deeper digging, which is the functional model, which is, okay, what is tiring out and engaging this immune system over and over and over such that it's making these bad decisions? Let's identify those things. Let's remove them. Let's support the immune system so that it can find its balance again. And it is amazing what can happen, such that you then don't need those immunosuppressant drugs. You don't need the anti-inflammatories. And in many cases, you don't actually even need to continue supporting the target organ or system, because now that you're not killing it off, it's able to do what it can do.
I love how you say that. This is totally my jam within my chiropractic philosophy, right? Because, you think of it when, let's look at the traditional Hashimoto, right? Like they're going to end up on T4. Yep. And they're going to end up on Synthroid, and all of a sudden they're still going to be fat. They're still going to be overweight. They're still going to be exhausted. But their T4 number is okay. So I know, like without even knowing you, I know that you're looking at it differently.
Oh, completely.
And out of curiosity, have you seen an influx of Hashimoto's over the last year? Or not necessarily.
Yeah, yes. So I specialize in Hashis. So it's so I always see an influx in it. It feels like the entire world has Hashis. So yes, what I will say, I'm seeing an influx of all sorts of things. I'm seeing, interestingly, within my Hashis clients, what I'm seeing is a lot of new liver issues developing, where I didn't used to see that. That would be like a thing occasionally. Now it's like, oh, here we go again. Oh yeah, there's those liver enzymes elevated. Now I'm starting to get to the point where I'm sort of pleasantly surprised when I don't see them, which is unfortunate.
And this is what I think is, like, all of us as practitioners, we're all witnessing certain things, but then our patients want explanations, but we don't have them.
We don't. Or we have theories, but
we have theories.
Years of research to say, go to the study.
Mm-hmm. Have antibodies increased on your people that were under control?
Dramatically.
Yeah, I've heard that from several practitioners too. So, and again, we're not saying like, hey, this X causes Z. What we're just literally saying, what we're having a conversation between two practitioners of what we're witnessing.
And I think there's so many different pieces to it. Anything that is introduced to the body that it doesn't recognize, that's foreign, it necessarily causes a stress on the immune system, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some things that are foreign that are more damaging than others. And especially when something is like brand new and, sort of a new technology, like there's just so much that we don't know about it.
Yeah. And we're not going to know for several years because we're still in trials. I know. And if one of the companies gets their way, they want 75 years to disclose.
I know. It's absurd.
Okay. Yeah. So anyways, let's talk about Hashi.
Yeah.
Especially because it is, let's explain what it is. Because like you just said, everybody and their brother has Hashimoto's, I feel like. And I truly, like, it is one of those things.
Unbelievable.
And I have shared it on one of my friends, also her podcast, and it was interesting. We really deep dived into this. And I don't even know if I want to, I have lab work, right, from October of 2020, and I was fine. It was absolutely fine. And by March, I could tell something was off.
Interesting.
Of 2021. And when I did my numbers, they were horrible.
Wow.
Like it wasn't a little bit of Hashi. I was like full blown near 4,000 in my antibodies.
Oh my God.
Right? Exactly.
From zero. Oh, that's like...
yeah. Yeah. So,
chills, not the good chills. Yeah.
And this is something where, I didn't participate in this.
Yeah. No,
so there's something else happening, right? So
something's going on.
So for sure. So it's affecting a lot of us, and we're all trying to figure out how to bring ourselves back. And especially, you know, like I've been gluten-free for 20 years, you know, I follow a paleo diet. It's all of those things where we're all doing the right thing. So for those of us that are dealing with Hashi, if there is somebody out there, let's explain what Hashimoto's is. Obviously it's an autoimmune condition. But what we can do to help heal our body. So that way we're not going to be on meds for the rest. And I don't like that thought process of, hey, I'm going to have to take thyroid stuff for the rest of my life. Right. And so I love your approach where it's like, let's look at this and what can we do to bring it back? Because again, our body is that innate intelligence is so amazing. Right.
It's
like
so profound. I mean, we don't give it enough credit.
No, we don't.
I mean, I know we're going to talk about Hashis, but just as a side note, you know, when I've had clients come in with really mysterious things, I mean, like the myasthenia gravis, when that client came to me originally, I was like, oh, I didn't know what that was. I had to do some searching. You know, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a functional nutritionist. So I'm really good at what I do, but there's certain things that people come in with these diagnoses that I'd never heard of. And she was like, have you ever worked with this before? And I said, quite frankly, not at all. But here's what I will tell you. I have seen things that can feel miraculous. It's not a miracle. It's just bringing the body back into balance, removing stressors and giving it the proper inputs. But what I do know for sure is that our birthright is to thrive. And our immune system is such a vitally important aspect of that. And if it is turning against us, there's a reason for that. And what I'm convinced of is that we'll find that reason and we can turn it around. I really firmly believe that, regardless of what the target of attack is. So it is so powerful what our body can do.
Yeah, I love it. And and I think this is what we're seeing, and you're probably seeing it as well. So many people now come in and say, I don't want this anymore. That medical model I'm done. Like we've been through the ringer the last couple of years. And so people are just like, and I've seen it several times, even just this week, where new people came in and they're like, how come I didn't know about you 10 years ago or 15 years ago? And I went through all of this. And so this is our whole like purpose, obviously. And I love how you're keeping it simple, because it is healthy living simple, and to give people the hope, like there is light at the end of the tunnel. We've been there. We get it. Right now, I'm currently going through it too. You know, like I was laughing with my friends this morning, my little Aura Ring track the other night. They're like, we sense an intense workout at this time period. I was like, it was in the middle of the afternoon while I was adjusting everybody. And I was like, if I burned this many calories just by adjusting patients all afternoon, I'm like, how come I'm not ripped? I'm like, oh, thyroid. That's why I'm not ripped right now. Like once it'll get back, it'll be fine.
No, I know. Right. I know.
So, yeah. So let's deep dive into Hashi. Let's see. Let's go
into the Hashi's piece. So, I mean, with Hashimoto's, essentially what's happening is the immune system is attacking the thyroid, and there's different things. There's, you know, the TPO enzyme or the thyroglobulin. So there's different aspects, but ultimately what's happening is the immune system is attacking the thyroid, and it is impacting its ability to produce sufficient amounts of thyroid hormone. And when that happens, what you have is a hypothyroid, so an underfunctioning, underperforming thyroid. And you get all sorts of brutal symptoms, like completely inexplicable weight gain. You know, how many clients come to me and they're like, nothing's changed. I'm still eating the same, like I'm doing all the same things. And I put on 30 pounds in a month. Like, we're not talking like little weight gain. We're talking major weight gain, thinning hair, super dry skin, feeling so fatigued that just like, oh my God, I don't know that I could get out of bed. And some of them can't. And really sluggish digestion. So like really slow motility, constipation. Some people get the lateral third of their eyebrows. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny.
I get those babies back.
Right. I have a symptom burden assessment that I have clients do. And it's so interesting. The ones who are like, that's a thing. Like they had no idea it was related to their thyroid. And so, it's really uncomfortable. And it is exactly as you said, you know, a medical doctor will prescribe thyroid hormone replacement essentially, and send you on your way. And they'll monitor some numbers, not all the numbers, not the most important number, which is your free T3, which is like the actual hormone that's going out there and doing the things, right? Because what they monitor is TSH, which is actually a pituitary hormone. It's your pituitary telling the thyroid what to do. And then they monitor typically free T4, excuse me. And T4 is an inactive hormone. It's the vast majority of what your thyroid produces. But then your body has to convert that T4 into T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormone that does the work, right? And so there's a lot of things that can get in the way of that conversion from T4 to T3. And that's a piece that's often missed. So you get people all the time coming in, they've been on meds, and the doctors look at the labs and say, you're fine, because they've optimized their TSH and their free T4, but they're not doing anything about the T3. And when we do a full set of labs and we look at all the numbers, including free T3 and reverse T3 and all these different things, and we see that it's like, oh yeah, no, there's the active hormone is not nearly sufficient to meet the body's needs, and no wonder you're feeling miserable. So that's one of the biggest challenges that I think clients experience, is they just, and I remember, so I have Hashimoto's, and I was diagnosed when I was pregnant with my second daughter. And I will share with you, it was a devastating moment for me. I was already a practitioner, specialized in autoimmune. And something about my history, my mother was diagnosed with very serious autoimmunity when I was in high school. And she had multiple different, she had very severe lupus as well as rheumatoid arthritis. And she ultimately lost her life to complications from the medications that were keeping her alive, barely. I mean, it was just this awful, slow, painful process of deterioration, over 20 plus years, where it was just like, one step forward, 4 steps back, one more surgical procedure, 3 steps. I mean, it was just like, I remember, we talk about the immunosuppressant drugs. Her immune system was so compromised because of all of the meds. She got a hangnail once and was hospitalized, I'm not kidding you, for 3 months because it turned into an infection that went all the way up her arm.
Oh my goodness.
And then she developed antibiotic resistance. I mean, it was just, it was like from a hangnail. Mm-hmm. Like, we have an immune system, like we don't remember that, like little things like hangnails, our immune system is dealing with that. Like, that's part of its job, is that internal care. So, so just turning it off isn't necessarily the best approach, or at least the long-term approach, So, so I had very upfront, close and personal experience of what does not work, and I'd made it my life's mission to make sure that nobody else that I can help has to go that path, because it was brutal. So getting that diagnosis was this like, oh my God, like, I'm a fraud. How can I be doing this if I'm like the specialist in this and I can't even prevent it, blah, 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 blah. Able to totally, like, just the spoiler alert, have been able to totally bring it into remission using all the tools. Like, I just did the work I did with clients with myself, so it was all good, but it was a scary moment. And I remember talking to the doctor about it because I wanted to run some follow-up labs postpartum, and he was like, didn't want to, I had to like fight with him to get the antibodies. He was like, and I was like, well, why? He's like, why do you need them? Once you've got the Hashimoto's, you've got Hashimoto's. And I was like, but why don't you care?
Right.
And he said, well, once you have it, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just about supporting the hormone levels. And I was like, okay. I mean, I disagree, but I got it. I was like, okay, they just really fundamentally don't believe that there is a way to actually bring autoimmune strategically and permanently into remission. So there's kind of a why bother, let's save you the money. And if I really believed that there was no point and no ability, like, I get it, I'd save the money too. I just don't happen to disagree with that. And, he was good about it. He was like, I get you're going to push for it and I'll order them for you. But, I don't know why, I should probably send him my current labs and say, that's why.
That's exactly.
But then I don't know if you've ever had this. I've had clients like in really serious autoimmune conditions whose doctor, they've been on medication for years, whose doctor told them there's no other way, diet has nothing to do with it, et cetera. And then we do this work. They have profound healing. They go back to that doctor and say like, hey, check it out. And you know what? At least half of those physicians have said to them, not all. There's some that are super like, wow.
Into remission.
No, some of them will just say, oh, we must have misdiagnosed you. I've had that happen so many times. And I'm just like,
I know. Yeah, no, I get it. 100%.
Wow.
I've seen that a lot where they're like, oh yeah, sorry. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm like, yeah, no, it's, something ingrained in their training, I think. And it's not, and this is not anti-bashing medicine. It's just the fact
No, not
it's the
at
tools in their,
all.
it's the tools in their toolbox. I remember walking into my, it was an osteopath way back in the day. This is the early 2000s. You know, I
Right.
was early, like brand new in practice, and I wanted my labs. And so I asked for reverse T3. He's like, I don't understand why you want this. And I was like, I want this lab, right? Well, it was must have been early enough that people weren't really asking for it, because $1,000 later, like in 2005, I got that lab. And I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have asked for that lab.
Right.
But you know, even now, it's interesting because I in a holistic practice that I know of over here, even their physician assistants won't order the
Yeah.
reverse T3. And when I'm like, okay, time out, why are you not doing this? Well, it's an expensive lab. I'm like, it's $22.
Right.
So it's funny how it's always, you're still, even when you walk into a functional practice, just know that sometimes you might have to dig a little bit more too.
Yeah. Yeah. You still, it's, yeah. And always advocate. I always tell people, like,
Yes.
you've gotta ask for what you need. And any practitioner who's not honoring that and not sort of trusting your instincts, that's a red flag. You want to really make sure they're really hearing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's continue
Yeah.
on with
Autoimmune.
Hashi. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
love you.
so what I'd love to talk about is the relationship of the gut, where we started with
Yeah.
Hashi's, because it's, and all autoimmune,
Yeah.
right? It's such an important thing. And it is also the starting point. Well, okay. The absolute starting point with Hashi's,
Yeah.
say goodbye to gluten. And it's a permanent goodbye. And I'm super sorry. I mean, we've all gone through this moment of like, oh, wow, that's it. And the good news is we're having this conversation in 2022, and the options for you are endless. I mean, truly, it's just, I remember having these conversations with clients 15 years ago. It was a very different conversation because the options were so awful. But now it's like, I mean, you can not just get gluten-free, but great grain-free, like, I mean, truly outstanding high quality products. So it's hard, but you're going to be okay. So that's absolute step one.
100% agree.
But if we think about, so I talked about the whole digestive process, right? And so a thing that most people don't realize is that the vast majority of your immune system, in the order of about 80%, I've heard from 70 to 90%. So let's average it to 80%. Most of the immune system lives in and around the digestive tract, right? So anything that is not working properly in your gut is necessarily taxing and engaging that immune system, right? And that is something like, how many times do you eat or drink something in a day? Talk about regular stressors, right? And the, you know, the question I often get, I mean, a lot of people with Hashi's also have digestive issues. So if you have digestive issues, you're probably like going, yeah, this makes sense to a certain degree, because it doesn't feel good in your gut. But even for folks without any kind of digestive symptoms, it is so important to start here, because you can have a lot of stuff going on in your digestive process that is really taxing that immune system, even without any kind of overt symptoms, right? So it can be a functional issue, meaning that you're not producing enough stomach acid, which means that you're not breaking down your protein sufficiently, and you're kind of rolling out the carpet for any orally ingested foodborne pathogens. You are maybe not secreting enough enzymes, or bile flow is a little sluggish. So all of these things are affecting your digestive function that you might not feel. In some cases you can feel it, but in other cases it can still be happening and you not actually feel it as a symptom. We talked about the leaky gut. That's a huge piece of the puzzle, right? Like anything that's getting across that gut barrier that should not be getting there is engaging the immune system. The balance of the microbiome, right? If you have what we call a dysbiotic microbiome, meaning basically that the good guys are not thriving, and the bad guys, like the opportunistic bacteria, they're like weeds in a garden. They do what they do. They take advantage of opportunities to overgrow, and they do. And this imbalance is another major stressor for the immune system. You can have pathogenic, and you know, anything from like an H. pylori infection in the stomach to parasites to, some of those bacteria that are overgrowing are really pathogenic. They're very, very pro-inflammatory. And they're adding an additional burden to the immune system. And then, in terms of foods, we talked about gluten, and there's some other kind of heavy hitters that for most people with Hashis, they need to pull out, things like soy and dairy, and of course, processed foods, generally sugar. But even beyond that, there can be these really hidden food sensitivities that are like the low-lying inflammatory burdens that are triggering this inflammatory process in the body at a low level. But it's that, it's the slow drip, right? That never stops. That's the stuff that's the most toxic and the most invasive. So for all of these reasons, I mean, some of these things, yeah, you'll feel symptomatically, but a lot of them can be there at a subclinical level, causing a lot of damage and taxing your immune system without giving you overtly gastrointestinal symptoms.
Yeah. And so often I feel like we're dealing with things. I've had the conversation numerous times, even with patients. But for me, right, like as a kid, I grew up realizing that my stomach always hurt after I ate. And I thought it was normal. Like, because as a child and how often it's funny how the conversations just go into cycles in the practice. And so multiple people walking and saying, well, I never thought to question it because it's how it's always been. 100%. Right. And so it wasn't for me, like, it wasn't until I went away to college and I realized that everybody else wasn't doubled over in pain after they ate. Right. And so then it was like, okay, something's off. And then chiropractic school, thank God, like I started digging, but it was finally then that I realized for gluten, and that was early 2000s where nobody knew, we weren't talking about gluten. So again, like you had just said, that conversation way back when you told people, it was like, all right, you're going to be paleo at this point, because there are no other gluten-free options for you. Like this is what you're doing, Lisa.
Totally.
But I want to give people that hope, because once you feel amazing, you realize like, oh my gosh, if I ate that, I'm going to be not feeling well. Like I remember running into a patient at a Christmas party years ago, and she's like, you're just so good. I'm like, no, I mean, it's the fact of like, I realized if I sat there and ate this garbage on the table, I will feel miserable for 3 days. Like there's a different word of it. Yeah, exactly. So
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that our baseline for what optimal is so freaking low. And I always tell clients, my goal for you is to feel better in your body than you even think possible. And I was just so much like you. And it took me a lot longer than college. It took me until my 30s when I changed careers and studied nutrition. But I thought it didn't even dawn on me that I wasn't like the picture of health. I didn't have weight issues. And so that was like, I looked good, but on the inside, I mean, I told you about the migraines, my gut as well. I had to lie down, curled up in the fetal position after most meals because I had such bad gut pain, and I just organized my life around it. I didn't think it was weird. I had such blood sugar dysregulation because all I ate was carbs. And I mean, I could not fathom an afternoon without a major cup of coffee and some kind of sugar. In fact, in my previous corporate life, it was just known. Like I would be in meetings and I would just sort of tune out. Like I wouldn't even be aware of it. I would just sort of like mentally leave the building, and my colleagues would recognize it and literally push a piece of chocolate in front of me. And I'd be like, oh, and I'd eat the chocolate and then like come back. I was just so wildly hypoglycemic. Right. And all of this to me, I didn't even think that this could possibly be wrong, And I remember my first week when I started studying nutrition, and we did some of the assessments we use with clients on ourselves, and my results were awful. Like, what's my structure? I'm like, what's going on? And she was like, yeah. And I just, I mean, I was also at the time, vegetarian, but not even a vegetarian. Like I didn't actually eat vegetables. I was a carbivore, right? I just like,
that was all. Yeah. I did the same
thing.
Lots
of starch, total low fat, lots of soy. I used to think, oh my gosh, I can never eat Thai. And it was because I was having this.
Don't you think the soy contributed to the thyroid though too? For sure. Right. 100%.
I'm sure.
I feel like that's when I first lost my eyebrows, the outer third.
Right.
And I mean, I was doing soy like crazy as protein powders and everything. Again, this is early 90s, right? Lifting and then.
Oh yeah.
All the acne I had in my 20s. I always laughed. I was like, like this is even worse than I was in high school. And now I'm like, oh my God, all the soy. So don't do soy, especially if you have thyroid issues. Oh, God, but just don't do soy at all. It's genetically modified. Like if you do it, you can use miso, but not. Yeah. So, what else do you want to share? This has been so great. I know, like, how about you want to touch on Hashi and fertility too?
Yeah, that's a big issue. So that's actually the thing that I specialize in. I had really good results with one of my clients back in the day, where she was quite, has a big following and talks a lot about the work that we did. And, she came to me, she's 30 years old, hadn't had a period in 3 years, severe Hashimoto's, barely managed by all the medication that she was taking. She was just that classic example of like the thyroid labs that the medical team was looking at looked fine, but she was miserable. And this, former college athlete who literally, again, she was one of these, like, couldn't get off the couch, had to quit her job. And so we were able to rebalance that very, very quickly and get her period back. And then she got pregnant like almost immediately, and has talked about this a lot. So now it's my practice, women in their 30s and 40s with Hashimoto's trying to get pregnant.
I love it.
So the thing with a hypothyroid situation is it really impacts hormone production. Our endocrine system, so all the different hormone producing organs, is just so amazingly complex. I would say we're still at the very, very beginning of even understanding it. But just, it's like one hormone goes out of balance, and think of it like a spider's web, right? It just like everything kind of pulls. And so when you have a hypothyroid situation, oftentimes we'll see it really impact estrogen production in women and testosterone production in men. So it affects both partners. And even though Hashimoto's is more common in women, I'm seeing a ton of it in men. So for those couples trying to get pregnant right now, I'm going to say, let's stop putting all the focus on the female in that partnership. And let's look at both of you, because that's a really, really important piece of the puzzle when we're talking about fertility. But it can prevent ovulation, which of course is fundamental to conception. And hypothyroid dramatically increases the body's risk of miscarriage. So, it also can increase prolactin levels, which is going to really make conception very challenging, if possible at all. So really making sure that those hormone levels are optimized. And when I'm saying that, I'm not just talking about, again, the TSH and the free T4, I'm talking about the full hormone panel. You really want to make sure the entire complex of hormones are doing what they should be doing. Which is why, I can understand the logic to a certain degree of just supplementing with exogenous hormones and assuming we're all good. But for many women, that is not the case. They need to actually do the deeper healing work. And I think something that's so important to remember and often gets missed is with any autoimmune, but we're talking about Hashimoto's, so let's focus on Hashimoto's. We spend so much time on the target organ, and we try to fix the target organ. But that's not the problem. It's the target. Mm-hmm. It's not the one taking aim, right? What's taking aim at the thyroid is the immune system. Yeah. So we need to remember that Hashimoto's is fundamentally dysfunction of the immune system, and start there. And that is, I think, the piece that gets massively missed, even by a lot of functional practitioners, I have to say. And I'm not, I know we're all doing the very best we can with the tools that we have, but I just think it's so easy to focus on the downstream result of imbalance, as opposed to really truly doing that deeper digging and focusing on ultimately of the root cause. And there's so much talk about root cause. It's like almost boring at this point, but really this is what we need to be doing. We need to be just detectives out there digging. Why is the immune system making bad decisions? And step one in that, after you've taken out gluten, is to look at the gut, just because so much of the immune system lives in and around it. And it doesn't mean that that's the last step. For some people, it's the first and last step. They do that gut healing, and that Hashimoto's goes into remission. We're able to keep them into beautiful balance. And, that client I mentioned, she's now had 2 children. Her second son is, I think, 2 years old at this point. This has been years. She's been in full remission off all medications the entire time. Right. So this isn't something, that's one of the problems with autoimmune, is that it ebbs and flows. And so oftentimes we'll have this like, oh, that's just the natural course. It goes in and out of remission. And you're right, it goes in and out of remission. But our goal is to bring it into remission and keep it there, right? As long as possible, if not forever. And, with her, it hasn't been forever yet, but we're in like year 5, year 6. And when you've been that long in remission, it's a very different thing from a few months in, a few months out. It's the natural ebb and flow tends to be a lot of a faster cycle. So really, we just have to focus on that immune piece of the puzzle. especially when we're talking about a female and we're talking about fertility, because let's run the whole story. So fertility is the very first step, right? Then you have conception. You want to maintain a super healthy pregnancy, and you want to be able to stay in remission postpartum, which is when so many women have their autoimmune flare for completely logical reasons. I mean, it's the perfect storm of factors that will trigger autoimmunity. So you have this total hormonal flip, right? Once the baby's out, you have your immune system, which a big aspect of the immune system actually shuts down while you're pregnant to make sure that your immune system doesn't attack this alien that you're growing, right? And so that part of the immune system comes right back online. You're probably not sleeping. There's a massive increase in stress because now you have a newborn in the house, whether this is your first, second, fifth, 10th, like it's always a stressful thing to bring another, living being into the home, especially in those early stages. So it is this perfect storm for an autoimmune flare. And so the ideal scenario is that you have really addressed and supported the immune system to bring that into remission prior to conception, not only so that you can conceive, not only so that you can maintain that pregnancy, but so that you can be a healthy and happy postpartum as well. And that this experience of bringing a beautiful other living being into planet Earth does not end up in you struggling with even deeper autoimmune issues.
And I think that's so beautifully said, because as women, it's so innate for us to take care of everybody else first. And you think of just even the stress that we've been over like the last couple of years. Well, and I keep seeing it with my patients, right? Like we've got posture changes and we're working on them. And I'm like, these are your nerves that are going to the thyroid. These are your nerves going to your stomach. Like these are the nerves going to the lungs. And we're in this constant panic. And like, but I'm not like, it's really not affecting me. I'm like, but it is, right? Like physiologically it is. I'm seeing it posture wise, it is. And so, no wonder our immune systems have all tanked when we didn't leave our house for a year or, and everything else. So it's the same reason and probably why we've got so many stressors being thrown at us. So I think the biggest thing is, ladies, we've got to learn to take care of ourselves, and men too, if you're listening. And
100%. You can't give another what you don't have, right?
Exactly.
And when we're talking about just baby making here, right? I mean, we're talking about this emotionally, energetically, but also just from a straight up physiological perspective. Like you cannot, like your nutritional status is what you pass on to that child. So if you go in super depleted, you literally don't have the nutrients to pass on to your baby. And that child is going to start off in a deficient place. That's part of the reason why we're seeing this really significant uptick in children's health issues. Like they're not being born from the same place that we were born, certainly nowhere near to where our parents' generation was born, right? Like I can think of my mom, oh, but we've always eaten this. Your grandparents ate this, and it's like, okay, we already talked about like the entire world, the environment, the food we eat, all of this is dramatically different. And they started off eating more so real food than we did. And with every generation, it's getting more processed. It's getting more nutritionally deficient. It's becoming that, what does Michael Pollan call it? These like food-like edible substances. Like it's not actually food, like you walk through the grocery store and it's actually alarming how much of that isn't really food.
And that always shows me like how intelligent our body really is, that we're able to still live with such nutrient, void foods.
I know. I mean, our bodies are magnificent and so resilient, but at a certain point, just like, even Superman at a certain point is like, I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. Oh my goodness. What else would you like to share?
Well, I mean, gosh, there's so many things. Well, I think a really important piece of this conversation when we're talking about autoimmunity, and I'm going to say for women in particular, and I know it's not just women, but every physical ailment that we have on some level is a metaphor, right? And so let's think about the body as attacking itself. And what do we do, right? Like we are our own worst critics. And so if there is an autoimmune process going on, what I'd really invite you to do is think about like, where is this showing up elsewhere? Not just physically in your life, but like, what is some of the self-talk? You know, what are some of the ways where you are turning on yourself? Because, you know, it was Mark David who first said this to me, which is he's the Institute for the Psychology of Eating, and just really interesting ways of thinking about food. But he always says the disease is the cure, which is like, wait, what? Why? How is the disease the cure? And really what this means is whatever this disease, whatever the ill health state is asking of you is exactly what it is that you need. And I mean, honestly, I've never seen a scenario where this isn't the case.
It's so good.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I can think of myself with the migraines, you know, I struggled with those for years. And, you know, once I became, you know, prior to nutrition, yes, I wouldn't be 5 feet away from my bottle of Advil, but post studying nutrition, I did a lot of gut healing. I did a lot of work. And of course, you know, the number, the frequency, the severity of those migraines dramatically improved, which was fantastic. But I would still get them occasionally. And especially so postpartum, my first daughter, it was, I'm sure because of lack of sleep and the stress and all the things, I was getting quite a few migraines and was really struggling with them. And a coach I was working with at the time challenged me to build a different relationship with these migraines. And she actually asked me to spend some time and like figure out the persona, like give these migraines sort of a character, like in a film or something. And, you know, when she first gave me this assignment, I was like, oh, it's going to be this like evil villain, you know, like just this brutal thing. Because, you know, when I would get these migraines, it just felt so intense and so unrelenting and so harsh. But when I got really quiet and like really thought through what these migraines were for me and what that persona was, what actually came through was mama migraine. And it was so interesting is it was so similar. So my daughter at the time was a year old, and this kid, not a sleeper. Like she fought, like she hated to sleep, hated it. And she would just, so napping was, I mean, just the freaking dance we had to go through to get this child to fall asleep to nap. And many times what I would finally resort to is literally holding her, like lying down with her and holding her, and she'd be screaming and she just did not want to be there, right? I can't even imagine what our neighbors thought was going on in our house. But I would just like hold her, you know, lovingly, but not let her get up until she just finally fell asleep and got the sleep that she desperately needed. And I realized that is exactly what my migraines did to me. It was exactly what they did. It literally was the only thing that would get me in bed and keep me there. And all I needed, and now, thank goodness, I mean, I've mostly learned the lesson. These lessons are lifelong lessons. So I will never pretend to like not have to have completely learned the lesson. So I've mostly learned the lesson, but still, now I still sometimes get them. It's always when I've been going way too hard. I've been ignoring the whispers, you know, that like, you need more. I've been ignoring my Oura ring. I've been just like driving. And then in comes a migraine, mama migraine, who is like lovingly, but firmly, nope, you're getting your ass in bed and you're not getting out for 24 hours. Enjoy it or don't, but you know, I tried. Right. And so it's, you know, developing that relationship with our physical symptoms is such an important piece of this process that I also don't think gets talked about. So yes, eliminate the gluten. Yes, do the digestive healing. And like, let's, you know, when our bodies are out of balance and they speak to us through symptoms, that's the only way the body can communicate. And so we need to be listening to those, not just suppressing those. It's incredibly important information. I mean, I don't need to tell you this, right? Like this is what you do day in and day out. It's always a sign of some kind of imbalance. And what we need to do is restore that balance. And sometimes that means going back to bed for a day. You know, sometimes it means taking out gluten, you know, but we have to be listening and not just fighting and overriding. And I'm not, you know, I've moved on from Advil. Do I take, you know, the Excedrin migraine now? If, you know, I've got a big day, and I just don't, you know, yeah, I do. I'm not going to say I don't, but I also, I'm like, okay, I heard you. we're going to get extra sleep. I'm going to take tomorrow off or whatever it is. Like,
yes,
always got to be listening to those messages and honoring them.
That's what I always say, is that our body gives us those symptoms to let us know it's a warning light. And unfortunately, we're throwing duct tape over the warning lights all the time.
All the time.
And then when the body shuts down, we're like, what happened? I don't get it. And it's like, well, I've been telling you for years, this is going on. So it is. And I love seeing how people are just sort of waking up on all of this and really finding more of a holistic approach on everything right now. So it's beautiful how it's all coming together, not apart. Margaret, tell them where they can find you. Share with them your social, your websites, all that stuff.
You bet. Absolutely. So website for my practice and literally hundreds of articles and recipes. My husband's a chef. And so, we do a lot of collaboration on there. So that's eatnakedkitchen.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Margaret Floyd Barry. And then also, if there's, I don't know if there's practitioners in your audience, but if this type of work sounds intriguing to you, I'm also co-owner of a company called Restorative Wellness Solutions, and we train health professionals in these tools. So nutritionists who are using more of the basic toolkit of, manipulating diet and some basic supplement protocols. We teach them how to do this deeper digging, as well as, we've had some chiropractors, acupuncturists, a lot of nurses, people who are in fact, more and more conventional medical practitioners who are feeling frustrated with the system and wanting to incorporate these tools into how they do their work, or just leave their practice and do something more profound. And so restorativewellnesssolutions.com for anybody who is interested in doing this work professionally. I can tell you, as I'm sure you would agree, it is some of the most rewarding, challenging, but rewarding work that you can do, is helping people who feel like they have really lost hope and have been just rebuffed by the medical system, gone from doctor to doctor, feeling so just disillusioned and unheard, being able to listen and hear and unpack what's going on and helping them feel better than they even believe is possible. It is like, I cannot believe I get to do this every day. It's the best work in the world.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.